Hey everyone, welcome to episode 2, I guess, of our podcast about reimagining the city and our election campaign for Mayor of Brisbane and the Greens election campaign for the 2024 council elections. I'm Jonno Sri. I'm running for Mayor of Brizzy, and I'd like to start by acknowledging country and paying respects to the Yagara and Turrbal people who are the rightful owners of this land, which we now call Brizzy, and recognising that our struggle for the future of this city, for a sustainable, ethical, democratic city, needs to be grounded in genuine respect for First Nations sovereignty and listening and seriously grappling with First Nations demands for land back and racial justice. So, yeah, today I'm excited to be chatting with my good friend Tiana. I'll be introducing her in a sec, but first, just a quick recap on how the election campaign's going. It's been maybe a month or so since I announced I'm running for mayor, and we've had a lot of really, exciting media coverage and public response so far. We launched a proposal to shut down the Eagle Farm racecourse and turn that massive site into 4,000 units of publicly owned rent-capped housing and 25 hectares of green space and parkland, and that was really well received. If you're interested in that proposal, you can find details on the website. And basically, we've just been out there talking to people, finding out what's important to Brizzy residents. Like in the early stages of an election campaign, there's a lot more listening, sort of gauging what's important to the electorate. And then as we get closer to the election day, we start saying, okay, here's what the community has told us is important. Here's what we're proposing to do about it. And so it's kind of still at the listening stage. In terms of the campaign itself, we're definitely still in like that early building stage of like recruiting volunteers, trying to find people to help with lots of different roles. So if you want to volunteer, like hit us up. It'd be great to get a few more people volunteering. And obviously we can always use campaign donations to help pay for stuff. But yeah, our campaign launch party is coming up in a couple of weeks. I'm really excited to, start organising more radical events. We've got a training session on eviction defence coming up in a few weeks, and I might mention that a little bit more at the end. But basically, it's the idea of resisting landlords who are trying to kick people out into homelessness. But yeah, if you want to follow more about what's going on with the election campaign, please sign up for email updates and we'll keep you in the loop about stuff. Right now, though, I wanted to introduce you to Tiana Peneha, who is the Greens candidate for Northgate ward on the city's kind of middle northern suburbs, inner north side. Tiana, do you want to tell us about yourself and what's your story?
Yeah, thanks, Jonno. I'd also like to acknowledge the Toombul and Yagara people. Also from my perspective too, from my tribe of the Ngāpuhi and Ngāti Kahungunu in our country, in New Zealand, we have the same thing. So just acknowledging that, sovereignty was never ceded and that, we've got a long way to go with that. So... so I am running for the Northgate ward. I've lived in Brisbane for about 8 years. I did spend 10 years before that down in Canberra, where I did work in politics and government and also the private sector. So, just coming back and just getting really excited to be a part of my community and see where we can take it.
So what suburb do you live in at the moment?
So I live in Nunda, which
cool.
it was actually first... called German Station. It was one of the very first sites out of there, but before that it actually was called Nunda, which is in Toombal language means watering hole.
Oh, right.
So which explains a lot about, that most of the land there is floodplain. So that's been a big issue in our area.
And what kind of drew you to that part of the city? How did you end up living in Nunda?
I did grow up on the Sunshine Coast in Tassie. It is the closest suburb to that I wanted to live in, to still be in touch with the city and to also be close to going up to family up on the sunny coast.
Yeah, cool. And so what do you think is kind of important to people living around Northgate ward, and like, what's your vision for the neighbourhood? How do you want to see it change?
Yeah, so what I found out that Nunda was actually one of the first hubs out of the city, and that's how I still look at Nunda now. It is one of the major hubs straight out of the city. It's got a great community there. We did have a lot of good infrastructure there. That we do have the train line, things like that, and it's really changed. I think you came there on the weekend and just realised we're really moving into families, and it has a really great diverse ethnic community there. So I think it has really changed. We are right next to the airport, and And I think it's just growing. It's very mixed kind of demographic there. So I really love that about Nunda.
Yeah, I think it's a really cool area because, as you say, there's a lot of older working class families and a lot of sort of retirees and people who've been in the area a long time. And then there's heaps of young families who are sort of buying into that neighbourhood because maybe they've been priced out of the inner city. And then there's also a lot of renters who've been completely priced out of the inner city and they're shifting into place. So like suburbs like Nunda in particular are seeing a massive increase in the proportion of renters. There's lots of young people who are really concerned about housing. And interesting, like you and I were talking about how the transport to the city is really good. Like there's a train, there's some good bus routes in and out of the CBD, but you can't easily get from that part of the north side to other parts of the north side. So the intersuburban transport links aren't great.
That's right. I think one of the first Greens events I went to was a forum you were hosting on public transport, and we talked about I had to drive there. And it was literally 4 suburbs over, but because it was inland, it would have taken me 3 buses to get there.
Jeez,
so I had to drive. So that's the issue. And last night they did actually hold a forum about the tunnel they're trying to build on Gympie Road, like underneath the tunnel under Gympie Road. And to be fair, the MPs that did go to it did say some pretty tragic things. So they try to use euphemisms like toothpaste and comparing it to maternity wards. So it was really interesting. And basically their whole drive was cars.
Yeah. And I think this is a big difference between the Greens and the major parties in terms of urban planning, and our vision for the city is like we want to improve public transport and make it easier for people to walk and ride rather than just having to drive.
That's right. And they still haven't finished the Northway Bikeway. So since the flooding. So that's a big hub for people to ride into the city, to go to work, to get to the south side. And that's still not a safe way. So I personally don't ride my bike along there because I'm too...
Fair enough.
You do have to go onto the road. And I know my skills, but I don't know the skills of the drivers around me. So
and I think, this makes me think, like you've got a kid at primary school, like a lot of families, they'd probably like it if their kids could walk to school by themselves, but they don't feel safe. And so then there's all this traffic.
That's right. And we've looked at around our area and, the council have implemented some active travel, but it's very token. Like, it's not really something that mums and dads can do Monday to Friday and get their kids to school and then go off to work. It's just, it hasn't really been looked at. And then I even looked at getting a zebra crossing put in between my house and taking my little one to school. And the school have been knocked back because the council have said, oh, well, actually, we'd have to put a lollipop lady on there and that would cost too much money. And I'm like, oh, okay, well, we'll just battle the cars around our area. So, little things like that.
No, it's so exasperating because Brisbane City Council has what they call like this active school travel program, which is basically about educating families about why it's cool to walk or ride to school. But then the families are like, you can tell us it's good to walk to school, but if it's not safe, we don't want to do it. And so the council's not putting the money towards, as you say, zebra crossings, like signalised pedestrian crossings. There's like this sort of false promise of like, we could reduce traffic congestion if everyone stopped driving their kids to school, but they're not actually making it safe to do so.
That's right. And an excuse like, we'd have to employ a lollipop lady. I'm like, well, that's really not that hard. It's like 2 hours a day.
Yeah.
And it makes it safer. And there's 2 schools that like have to cross on that one very busy road. So, I think I've just got sick of the excuses, really.
Yeah,
and so that's
exactly.
why I've decided to step up. So my little one actually complained that, Mummy, why do we have to drive to Petrie or to Portside to go to those outside water parks? And I was like, well, Mummy's going to do something about that and just reinvigorate our parks. I think next door they just spent $10 million on the Kedron Park. Have you seen it?
Yeah, right, yeah.
And it really is only accessible for kids say maybe age 6 to 14. So it's $10 million spent on a park that's really only for like a certain age group. Like it's too big for my little one to play on. And then, it's not the type of park that I think a whole community, and then it's in a residential area, so there's no parking.
Right,
Yeah, little things like that. And then and then taking him to the closest pool, which is Chermside, costs us $25 to go into that.
Yeah,
so for a session. So I've gone, how am I going to work this so that my community can have access to things that are close by and to keep kids occupied without spending a lot of money. So, it was a little bit of okay, what can I do about this? What's going to drive some change?
Yeah, cool. Well, speaking of like local community facilities, like one of the big conversations in your part of the city has been the future of Toombul Shopping Centre. Yeah. So for those who don't know, Toombul has for many years been a pretty big commercial hub. There's been this massive shopping centre that's been there for decades. I think it had a cinema, right? At various points, it's had a bowling alley and all sorts of stuff. So it wasn't just where people came to get their groceries. It was like a real meeting place and sort of a civic space. But it was built on very low-lying land. And looking back on it now, I'm kind of like, how did that thing ever get approved? Like, we know, right? Yeah. It's because developers have this sort of undemocratic influence over city planning. But yeah, the Toombul shopping centre got flooded again really badly in February 2022. The entire lower car park was under a couple of meters of water, and a lot of the shops themselves were damaged. And then I think water came through the roof as well. So the place was completely messed up. But now it's sort of sitting empty, and there's a little bit of uncertainty about what's going to happen with it. The site's owned by a private developer, but they're in no rush to redevelop. And meanwhile, residents are saying, hey, where are we going to go to the shops? Where do our kids hang out after school? All that sort of stuff.
Yeah, that's right. And the important thing about Toombul, it was that village kind of feel, where there was a Heart Foundation walking group in the morning. So when my little one was a baby and I had nowhere to go with him at 5 o'clock in the morning, we would join that group and go walking in the shopping centre.
That's so interesting because, there's been a bit of conversation about like malls as public spaces. They're air conditioned. That's actually where people want to hang out. And even though they're privately owned, they can often end up serving this really important public gathering space role.
That's right. And they've just recently done it up in the last couple of years and put an eatery, done up the cinema, and then I went to a gym there that was owned by a couple, and now unfortunately they're all in a class action because the company that owned that didn't deem it flooded. They just didn't renew their leases. So there's a class action by a group of some of the shop holders there that would like compensation because, say, for example, the gym that I used to go to, they invested $1.3 million into that gym. It's just a couple, and they lost all of that money. And they'd only been open, maybe 8 months. So just community hubs like that. I mean, that shopping centre has been open since the 60s.
Yeah.
My grandmother used to go there, and it was just such an important hub. And you're right, it was built on a floodplain. It did used to actually be a dairy farm.
Right.
And they've been given the opportunity to demolish it, so that's what's been done, but there's no word. And so all the residents that use that now have to go to Chermside, which is a nightmare to get into, or they have to go all the way over to Stafford or all the way up to Tagham to do their shopping. And the thing is, my doctor is now 5 suburbs away over in Everton Hills.
Yeah,
so for me to go to my doctor, I have to travel 25 minutes each way to go see him, whereas I used to look at him.
And this really highlights the importance of localized shops and services and facilities, because if we don't have that stuff in local communities, then more people are driving. There's more traffic congestion. So obviously the broad Greens approach to this stuff is that it should be up to the broader community to decide what happens with these sites. We don't just want to leave it up to private developers, and we also don't want it to be like us as Greens councillors dictating from on high what should happen. So if people out in the community have views on what should happen to Toombul Shopping Centre, please let us know. But Tiana, what's your vision? What do you want to see happen with that site?
Well, that's right. Do you know what? I've been in my community. I've had some really interesting ideas thrown at me. Just going straight past Toombul is actually the air train link. So, trying to build something into like a transport hub. You do have Toombul Station across the road. Residents have said that they would like green space. They would like all their commercial part of it back there. And then if they do have to compromise with residential, that's what they would like. But I would just like to see those services go back there. It was used by a lot of the older community. So you do see, and COVID didn't help with that. A lot of the older people did, stay home and they don't feel safe in those bigger shopping areas. So giving them a place that's a community feel without having to go to those cumbersome big shopping centres, where this was a medium density one, and it had more of a village feel. I've known a lot of the shop holders, and I've gone to visit their new sites and, dropped in to say hello and see how they're going. So, we do really miss that community feel of it.
Yeah, and I think for me, part of the problem here is that if we leave it up to private developers, they're not going to redevelop that site in the best interest of the community. They're going to redevelop that site in a way that maximises profit. And that might mean that they actually leave it empty for several years while they wait for property values to rise or for construction costs to drop. I would argue that maybe what should happen is that the site should come back in under public ownership, or at least part of the site should come in under public ownership. And maybe what we should be doing is taking the lowest part of the site, like the bits of the car park that always flood, turn that back into green space. Maybe that can be the playgrounds and the parkland and reconnect that sort of section to the wildlife corridor that runs along the creek. And then the rest of the site on the slightly higher ground can be redeveloped, as you say, not just as shops and services, but also maybe medium density public housing, or a mix of housing that's for people on really low incomes, and a mix of housing for people on sort of higher incomes, so that you get that mixed community. But yeah, we know that we don't want just like pure commercial shopping mall uses on sites like that. We want the shopping and the residential together, because that creates that sort of full, complete neighbourhood, rather than the shop in one place and then people having to drive to get to it.
That's right. And the social housing aspect of it. We've just got like a community of people that are living along the Kedron Brook now in tents that are homeless.
Jeez,
so
yeah.
Sometimes I when I've got leftover food from the food bank where I go every Tuesday, I do drop down some food for
Good
them.
on
So, that's the big thing, that we need more affordable housing around there. My rent's just gone up $50 a week.
Jeez.
And then some of the other people around there like have gone up 130 because they're stopping NRAS next year. And there
Far
are a lot
out.
of NRAS houses, units around there. So that's a big issue. We need more housing. We need more affordable units. We don't want luxury apartments. So that's a big thing about Nunda. We do need to get people living there to increase foot traffic through there, to help a lot of the small businesses and make it more affordable.
Yeah, and speaking of rents, like we've been talking about, how do we effectively resist landlords and real estate agents who are jacking up the rent and kicking people out into homelessness? And that's why within the mayoral campaign, we've started organising these eviction defence training sessions. And the idea is just to put a little bit of constructive collective pressure back on landlords, basically by training people to peacefully blockade at the moment when an eviction is being enforced. And we've done this a little bit in the past, but yeah, essentially if someone's about to get evicted, you get a whole bunch of tenants into the front yard, and when the landlord or the real estate agent rocks up to enforce the eviction, we basically just stand in their way and non-violently resist. So that's going to be an interesting tactic that I'm keen to see deployed and worked on over the coming months. But I guess it also speaks to the fact that we're trying to do politics a little bit differently in this campaign. And this is something you and I have been talking about, how we don't want to just be like photo op politicians, right?
That's right.
Yeah.
I want it to be more authentic. I think my journey to coming into politics is quite organic. I've done volunteer work for the last 20 years, but I've also worked in the policy side of government and politics myself. So I feel like it's a genuine marriage of those two passions of mine. And I feel that, I don't want to just... Some of the mums at school joke that, are you going to borrow my baby to take photos of me kissing it? Like, leave my kid alone.
Yeah, totally.
Stop trying to kiss my baby for photos. So, look, and I do like to joke around it, and I do have a dry sense of humour, but I don't want to be that type of politician. I want to be genuinely in my community and making a change, and not just making token promises or making deals behind closed doors. I want it to be, what I've learnt from you, and that's getting the community to participate in how we shape our community.
Yeah.
Not just getting big investors. You came along to our Nunda Village Street Festival, and, there was and I've even spoke to some of the shop holders in Nunda Village going, it just didn't feel like a festival.
Right.
And I said, it's funny because Jonno went over to the West End and he went to something that was more community-based. So that was something I would love to take hold of next time, is to have more community input, have more of the community groups being performers and being store holders, because that just didn't feel authentically like what my community needs.
Right. Yeah.
So,
I mean, this is an interesting thing about community events, because sometimes, I think it's really cool when community events involve people as participants, not just as passive consumers. There's a big difference between going along to a festival where you're just kind of sitting in the audience, maybe watching a band on stage perform. And that's cool, and we want that as well. But what are the ways that people, when they come to a community festival, can actually feel included as participants and not just passive consumers who buy a donut and a coffee and sit and watch something, and then there's a real estate agent stall trying to sell properties.
And a lot of the food stalls that were there had come from outside. I would have liked to have seen the organisers of it include some of the small businesses. There's an amazing Momo place in Nunda that provides food to people that are doing it tough. So, and they also have a pay it forward system. So they didn't have a stall there, things like that. So I want it to be more community based. I think there should be more input from the community, and they should have highlighted some of the groups. Like 8% of the community in Nunda is made up of the Nepalese community.
Right.
Why didn't they have a dance group there? Why didn't they have something highlighting them? Because lots of people don't know that unless they went on the SBS's, demographics of what your suburb breaks down to. So, even New Zealand is like the next highest after Australians. Why didn't they have a group there? So,
do you mind telling me a little bit about like New Zealand expats and how they relate to Australian politics? I know it's hard to generalise, and I'm sure people have lots of different experiences, but I've talked to a few Kiwis who are like, I'm allowed to vote, but I don't really pay much attention to politics. I don't feel it's relevant to my life. Do you encounter that as well?
I do a little bit. I think I'm very different because I did come over when I was very little. I was 3. And so, look, a lot of the Kiwis, a perfect example is one of my uncles. I lived in Canberra and I lived near Tent City. And I rang my uncle and he's like, oh, yeah, I'm just down at Tent City. And I'm like, what are you doing down there? If everyone doesn't know, Tent City is outside the original old Parliament
the Tent
House.
Embassy. Yeah.
Is the Tent Embassy. So it's basically been like a 30-year protest. And my uncle was down there and I was like, Uncle, I just live in like 200 metres up the road, weren't you staying with me? And he's like, I'm down with my people. And so I think that's the sentiment that a lot of the New Zealanders have is like, we went through this and we went through this whole battle. But the difference is that, there were 8 main tribes in New Zealand. We came together and signed a treaty, but we're still feeling the effects of it now. So, after that many years of signing the Treaty of Waitangi, so we feel for it. We feel for these people here. We feel for the First Nations and we just want the best for them. We know that systemic policy decisions have put them where they are. And, 53% of Māoris are still the main incarcerated peoples over there. So, it's still really, what has the treaty done? And when people say, what has the treaty done? Well, we still do live in the lower poverty lines and we are the most incarcerated people over there. So, that's where I think we feel this alliance with the First Nations people going, we just want better for them. We want better for our people. We want better for every Indigenous group. So
I think that's such a good note to end on because really what this campaign is about system change. It's about recognising that the systems that shape our lives are fundamentally unjust and oppressive. And so in running for council, it's like, we want to make our communities better. We want to plant more street trees and get better parks and all that sort of stuff. But it's also about challenging what I think is kind of a broken democracy and that fundamental transformation and reimagining of our society. So, I'm excited to see how things go over the coming 6 months. For those who haven't been following closely, Northgate Ward is a real sort of like a marginal seat, and it's the sort of seat that either the Liberals are probably going to hold it or the Greens might just win it. Like it's going to come right down to the wire. So if people want to get involved with Tiana's campaign, make sure you check her out online and volunteer if you can. But any final words, Tiana?
Yeah, that's it. We just want change. The other 2 parties have had decades to make systemic change, and that's where we've come in. We've gone, you know what? I'm sick of sitting by and watching this happen. I have a little person in the world. What can I do to make this place better? And let's do it from like a council level and then build up. So I'm excited to be a part of this journey, and I think we've got a really strong team going into the election next year.
Yeah, nice one. Cool. All right, that's probably about it for this week's podcast. I don't know how often we're going to do these, but keep an eye out for the next one. And if you haven't yet signed up for email updates on our campaign, you can do so via the website and keep in the loop about all the other cool stuff we're up to. See you next time.